we're doing it.
So I was getting together that would be I can do that now. We're going to talk about and that's what you
thinking back of these behaviors in the organization.
That put me here. I'm sort of mixed between whether I'm
I'm going to just interrupt you for one moment. I should have explained something. This sheet here with the tree on the back, it's so similar to this. On the outside here, you've got some printing around the outside. We're going to work with that a little later. That's what it looks like when you're doing the opposite, when you develop out of this. So you're probably going to want to focus on the inner part here or here for now. I apologize for the confusion.
So that tends to solicit these kinds of behaviors. Meaning, if you've got a controlling senior person in the organization that tends to solicit and elicit compliant types of behavior, and so I think there's that combination. And I think when we answer to the question is when my environment is controlled in a circumstantial, I want to hear other. Then my reaction will be how these in my mind. So that's why I know where the way.
My context lately for leadership is nonprofit roles, and so you don't have the normal levers to motivate, control, manipulate, whatever. If you annoy a volunteer enough, they just go away. So you can't fire them. Right. So for better or worse, I probably spend a lot of time protecting to maintain my own situation, to maintain my own position, try to get things done, whether or not it's the most effective way, and to just say this is
right. You don't want to however, you need to be proactive. A lot of times, these are not necessarily they're allowed. Probably get something from the
where maybe this terminology brings in that
Yeah, in a way. I talk to stuff before it's Go home.
Take about one more minute on this. Come on back.
emergency situation. The lesson was you have to step in and you have to be aggressive. You tell people what to do. You set the meeting exactly
Okay, could we wind up the last sentence and come on back to planner?
Yeah,
Be the big room.
but we all have our.
I'm going to ask a chance to get a bit of feedback on what you experienced there. But it was one thing I want to clarify. Is one of the groups brought up to me, and I probably didn't make it as clearly as I could have. A lot of we're looking at how we are in the reactive, the lower half. Many of these are strengths that can be reapplied in a much different spirit. For example, somebody brought up the word critical. If I'm a critical person and I'm operating from a reactive, critical way, I'm putting you down and criticizing your point of view or your proposal or your decision in order to make me look better. So it's a weapon to one-up you. So that's using critical in a very reactive way. Or if somebody attacks what I do, I'll go back and be critical back at them. That's protecting. So that's reactive. I'm reacting and I'm shoring up my own defenses, as it were. Alternatively, and this is one thing we'll look at the second discussion, if I want to take that strength, because being critical is the strength, isn't it? What's the strength around critical? Analysis, yes. Maybe you can see patterns. And you can quickly see flaws and dangers and opportunities that are not being taken. Except you're using it as a weapon to make other people look less than you are. That's reactive. So that's an example of a development. If you want to start migrating up to the creative level, you might say, well, I'm really bloody critical all the time. Yeah. How could I turn that around and use that strength in aid of something beyond me? So it will be pointing out flaws that we're missing, but not a flaw, something we're missing. Before we move ahead on that decision, I've got a real concern about this, and this will happen. Here's my analysis. I want to make sure we look at it before we all make a decision. So stop for a minute, team. Now I'm bringing my critical strength forward in aid of the team, the result, the outcome. I just want to clarify. Does that make some sense? And you could use that for many of them. As you're saying, probably not with arrogance. I don't know how you flip arrogance around, but there might maybe pride. I don't know. Anyway, just before we move on, just react. What happened to there? Any insights or thoughts or questions? Or
I have a question.
Yes.
When you look at this under protecting here, and you look under here, they don't seem to mesh together. I mean, these seem almost kind of negative to me, and these don't seem so negative under the gifts.
And that's the point when I interrupted you that I missed clarifying. This sheet I gave you, this one, I should probably have it in a handout after at this point.
Okay.
On the inside is the negative aspect of being reactive. On the outside are what the gifts are from the reactive that you could take forward and turn into creative. So I would, for right now, I would not look at the outside here.
Okay.
Sorry, my apologies on that. Okay, is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, good. And you weren't being critical either.
No, of course not.
Yes.
I guess a quick question for me is fundamentally what underlines these types of behaviors? Is it a deep sense of insecurity? Is it this idea of kind of imposter syndrome, of never feeling like, you know, you're enough? Like, what do you feel underlines these types of behaviors?
Well, it's definitely a fear. It's a fear of being in danger, of not being safe and secure, and not being valued. So if the controller, who's a really strong micromanager and a tough boss, we've all got them, we've seen many of them, we've worked with them, the more controlling are, it's probably the more fear they have of if they lose control, chaos will happen, and I'm gonna get blamed. And I'm the only one standing between me and chaos and my team running off in all directions.
So you feel like it's more of a fear of the consequences?
Yes.
If things don't go the way we think they should.
And to your point, in many cases, it was developed as a child. If something happened to you as a child, you learned the only way, the protecting people, the only way to be safe in my family is to go to school, learn a lot of stuff, be smarter than my parents, and be able to out-argue them.
Which is parallel to that evolution you showed earlier from child to adult.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that parallels. Yeah.
Yeah, if we had more time, we could look down into the, or that, yes. Aaron?
Our group was could pick out their areas very quickly, but during our discussion we realized sometimes the environment or the culture of the workplace or the situation kind of molds you into something you may not want to be or are naturally, but you have to do that to protect yourself or your team or whatever. So we found that interesting.
Yeah. So just to that point, if you're operating in a reactive culture and the top team is all very reactive and they emulate the reactive stuff, then you're going to force, if you want to stay, you're going to maybe have to be there. But if you realize this is not how I want to be, like there's things in you saying, I want to be more like what's up here, right? You might have to make a career decision if you're influencing. Good point. There's whole cultures around this too.
Yeah, to that point, what I was saying earlier is that if you have the leadership of an organization, the individual, if you will, who is really the primary creator of the culture of the organization, if they're in the reactive half, they're going to instill the reactive behaviors. So you have a controlling leader, you're going to have compliant people.
Yes.
Or at least it's going to solicit those behaviors and those reactions from the compliant people who might otherwise in a creative environment. So in a creative environment, they might flourish.
Right.
Because that would solicit those behaviors from them. So there's a real cost to the organization from that point of view.
And there's a belief around the circles that I work on with this is that the team, if you take the collective top team, to your point, it's only as effective as the least developed person. So if you have 6 people in your team and a couple of them are fairly reactive, and that's where they are, they just haven't developed, then that's going to be the level of the team's ability. It's going to be operating at a more reactive level. They'll drag you down. So their whole idea, and the second book they wrote, it just came out last year, called Scaling Leadership. It's Bob Anderson and William Adams. They talk about scaling starts with yourself as the leader. Let me go through the journey, as it were, start to develop. Then I'll bring my team along, and then we go for the rest of the managed group at least. Okay, good point. One more, I got time for one more question, and we got to roll. All right, we're going to roll. Fair enough. A little bit more content, and then I'm going to give you some more time to go into something, and let me take us back to where we were. Good. Okay. So I want to add one more piece, and then we'll have a chance to give you a longer time to look at what you might to do to bring more of your reactive side along up. And this is not to say a lot of you're not working in the creative level now. I've met so many of you, and much of us are up there, but our feet are still down in reactive. We have both in us. So when you're in the creative state, you're focused outwards, not inwards. So achieving results and playing to win. Very results oriented. Achieving leaders, creative leaders who are focused on achieving, they'll push for results. But it's about the passion of the goal rather than the consequences if you don't perform. So they will draw people by the passion. But some of the best leaders are extremely results-oriented. They're not wusses. We're not giving away. Engaging with people rather than pulling back or controlling or sucking up to them. Actually, just as adult, human being to human being, just, hey, engaging with them as a person. That's a big shift. Bringing out the best in others, and obviously having the courage to stand there and say, I do not agree. The compliant person to stand up and say, I do not agree, is like the worst possible thing that could ever happen to them. They'd be so afraid they just wouldn't do it. I worked with a manager a few years ago who was heavily on compliance, and she had a staff of about 4, and the whole thing was they had one performer, one person that was really not doing well, but it was drawing the others down, and she would not confront it. She tried to, but every time she'd get in, she'd mush over the message. She just couldn't say it clearly because she was so captured, originally unawares, by her compliance. And she said, that's how I live my life. That's got me where I am today. And I said something like, well, that's probably true. But look what it's doing, it's stalling your effectiveness now. You've got to deal with this low performer. And most of the coaching I did was around how do you say that, not from a compliant way, but from a results-oriented way and a bigger picture, and taking a firm, courageous stand. If you look on the little circle there, look at the diagram, she would have been down under complying, and we were talking in the little coaching session about how can you deal with poor performance by working from the authenticity at the very top at 12 o'clock. What would that look like if you spoke authentically that you needed her to change? And stayed in the conversation even though your knees are shaking, And so we practiced it, and actually she did some good work with it. It was always a struggle. But so that's about, there's a lot of courage here that doesn't come out in the other. A controlling boss is not really a courageous boss. They're a bully at the extreme, aren't they? At the extreme. They're not all like that. So, this whole idea of our shift in helping managers shift from that reactive level to become a leader that's more creative, we call it a hero's journey. And it's this idea of OS, operating systems, upgrading the operating system, become a higher version of ourselves. I'll always have my criticality of my protecting in there. And I always have my need to read the extra book and know the article and know the author you're going to quote. It's there, it's in me, I can feel it. I'm steeped in it. But I don't use it the way I used to do it. I don't use it the way I say, look at how smart I am. I just use it to, as I hear things, well, here's somebody who wrote something over here, maybe this would apply. That took a lot of, but I still got the other. And if somebody really attacks my smartness, I'll probably go back to some of that stuff. So it's in us, but I'm trying to transcend it. And that's the spirit of this in all of us. So the reactive state is coming in on us here. The game is play not to lose, not play to win. First of all, be safe, then get some stuff done. That would be kind of the mantra maybe of it. Self-protecting, sometimes pulling back, being aloof, which is one of my issues around protecting, controlling or dictating, going along to get along. That would be the classic reactive. But when we're in the reactive state, we don't know it because we're in it. I can't see my compliance if I'm in my compliance and I'm operating from a reactive state. I'm just scared of what people say and I want to fit in. And so it takes somebody from outside, a mentor or a coach might say, you know what you're doing there? You know what I'm seeing? And they start to give an outside observation of my compliant behavior. And that might be the beginning of saying, oh, gee, maybe I am compliant. Ooh, that's not good. What can I do? But until I get there, I'm stuck in it. It's got me. And it's got me in terms of the assumptions I make, the beliefs I have, the neural pathways, the habits of thinking that I've had maybe since I was very, very young. I developed a very deeply ingrained neural pathway that I always bring in. Be smart than everybody else in the room. Deeper, every time I do it, I get deeper and deeper in the neural pathway. Just configure one more thing and pick it up, Susan. So some examples of this. I can't afford to be wrong or make a bad decision. There's an assumption or maybe a belief. Well, of course, as a coach, you may say, well, tell me more about that. How come? You know? Why? What would happen if you did make a wrong decision? Oh, I just know I can't, okay? I'm not strong enough or smart enough to disagree with managers or peers or my boss. I don't have the brain power. So guess what I'm gonna do in the meeting? I'm gonna shut up or go on. Because I know I'm not smart and I don't wanna say something, find out, yeah, I'm not smart, and that's gonna hurt doubly. So a lot of these things are assumptions that aren't necessarily real, but we bought into them. Susan, go ahead.
So then are you working with the person around blind spots and deepening their awareness so that they can start to get a feel of of their impact on others and others' impact on them?
It is about blind spots, isn't it? So is that a question?
So if you're then, I know when I'm debriefing 360s and you go through the competencies, it's like then you hone in on the blind spots because they can derail you. So
Yeah.
is that the same thinking here?
Well, that's certainly from a coach or mentoring approach to help somebody migrate north. That's the way to go. To help, it's that whole idea of starting to be able to see myself not in the relationship, but almost like I can watch myself over here being in the relationship and observe as a third party. As soon as I can objectify what I'm doing, now I can deal with it. Is that similar to yours? That's
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was a different perspective.
Yeah, it's about blind spots. So then the whole idea, and we've had this version presented around this table before, the assumptions lead to the behavior. So if I'm working in a reactive mind, I'm going to operate like reactive managers do. It's going to get some results, it's going to piss people off, it's going to drive people away, it's going to demotivate them, so I can't get the best out of my team. And I don't realize it. So the assumptions are these, and these are on the second side of your sheet. I'll go through them very quickly, and then we're going to unleash the power of the trios one more time. We'll go deeper into this. Here's some of the assumptions. Under complying, these would be the kinds of thinking typically that complying leaders would have in them that would be dictating and determining their behavior as they try to lead a group or a team or a company or department. I'm okay only when people approve of me and like me. Or to succeed, I must live up to others' expectations. Pure compliance. But if you believe that, that's the route to success. You're not going to rock the boat. I'll stay secure as long as I support others and so on and so forth. The world is a dangerous place. That would be a classic one for compliant people. And maybe they learned that a lot earlier than in the current company, the organization they work for. So those are some of the complying ones. The protecting ones that again are driving behavior. I'm not going to read them all out here. There's me. I'm valued because of my intellect and the superior sight I bring. If you want to hire Ian, you get all this wonderful knowledge and insight coming in, and he'll know all kinds of stuff. Didn't always work for me. I stay safe by remaining aloof, less available. I always have to know. I always have to be right. So you can get the idea. And to your question, Susan, it's Susan, right? Yeah, Susan. As a coach, if you could start to dig in and get, well, what's behind that? What's your concern if you stood up to your boss and said, no, I don't agree? You'd probably trigger, well, not in protecting, but in complying, one of these assumptions. And you listen for it, and then you say, well, is that really a true assumption? Could we run it by the current day meter? Is that right? How long have you believed that? Well, ever since I was about 12. Okay. Can we just check it out again? Is it still valid today? And that's how you invite a conversation with the leader about their assumption, and so they can start to see their assumption, like you're saying, pull it out of the blind spot. Okay, it's there now. What other kind of assumptions you could have rather than this one? What might be a kind of assumption that could drive you to confront, to call on poor performance and call it out or whatever? So this is the route to change behavior for a coach or for ourselves. If you're working on yourself, and say, what are my assumptions? What has me? Finally, control. Again, you have these there. So I stay safe by taking charge. Ever known managers like that? Take charge. I'm the boss. And by the way, it says it on the door, in case you have any doubts. The world is made of winners and losers. I must be a winner. Can't afford to lose. Sound familiar? Anything else than perfect opens me to criticism. And so this is where you'll get perfectionism. Ever had a manager who was so perfect, you were crossing, you missed a period here, you know, I want you to use somewhat instead of occasionally or whatever. No, it's just using power. Okay, enough of that. Here's the challenge, and we have a good chunk of time for this, well, about a good 10 minutes or so. You have this sheet to help you out. You can now look on the outside, what's on the outside, because this is a representation of the strengths. For example, looking at the controlling. If a controller can take their strengths forward to a more creative level, they'll look at work on continuous improvement, pushing for outstanding results. Controllers are great, they're drivers, but let's drive them in a way that'll help the organization, not help their own glory. So what I'd like you to do is look at the 3 tendencies. Pick the one that's most truly for you. You did that before a little bit. What draws you more for your own development? Now, a lot of this, you've already moved beyond a lot of this. So you might want to find one that you're pretty good at and want to get better, or one that you've been avoiding and you might want to look at. We're all not all stuck in reactive 100%. Put a check mark besides the assumptions against that particular item. And if you can think of one reactive behavior that you might start to work on or develop going forward, different from what those assumptions are creating in your style and you're operating, what would that be? What assumptions might you replace it with? And where might you start practicing that new behavior? Questions? Okay, have at it. I think it was a good 10 minutes on this.